An unserved warrant for the lynching of Emmett Till was found in a Mississippi courthouse this morning. Relatives of Till are now calling for that warrant to be served almost 70 years later.
New evidence has been found in the lynching death of civil rights icon Emmett Till. According to Till's relatives, a team with the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation found the unserved warrant charging Carolyn Bryant Donham with Till's 1955 kidnapping. The Leflore County Circuit Clerk says the warrant was uncovered last week. Donham was never arrested. 14-year-old Till was murdered in Money, Mississippi for allegedly whistling at Donham. Till's relatives in the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation want Donham taken into custody.
The 1955 warrant charged a woman who claims 14-year-old Till sexually harassed her with his kidnapping. The woman who identified Till to the men who would go on to kill him, Carolyn Bryant Donham, is still alive and living in Mississippi.
And breaking right now, a discovery in the nearly 70-year-old murder case of Chicago teenager Emmett Till. A team searching for evidence in Till's murder found an unserved arrest warrant in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse. That warrant charged a white woman in Till's 1955 kidnapping. The woman in question was Carolyn Bryant Donham, who was married to one of the men acquitted in Till's murder. The team that made the discovery included two members of Till's family and the Till Legacy Foundation. Now the family is demanding that Donham be served and charged in the case.
Emmett Till's body was found in the Tallahatchie River August 31st, 1955. A week before, this 14-year-old Chicagoan, vacationing in the Mississippi Delta, had whistled at a white woman, 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant. On September 6, 1955, two white men were charged with Emmett's murder. Roy Bryant, husband of Carolyn Bryant, and J.W. Milam, his half-brother. At the Tallahatchie County Courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi, the murder trial began 2 weeks later. Physically, virtually nothing has changed in this town since late September 1955. Coming down the street, you can still see the 12 jurors, every one of them white. Coming from the law firm of Breland and Whitten, you can still see the two white defendants, their wives, their children, walking toward the courthouse. Inside, you can still see the mother of J.W. Milam wiping the sweat from the brow of her son. And you can still hear Tallahatchie County Sheriff H.C. Strider.
We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggers go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
Outside the courthouse, the cameras waited. Inside, black reporters sat at a segregated table. Simeon Booker was there.
It was a terrifying experience. I've never been in a situation like that where you knew it was a trial that had no end because you knew they were going to be freed.
Sheriff Strider handed a subpoena to Emmett's mother, commanding her to testify.
What was my concern in the courtroom? More or less a matter of getting in and out alive every day. It was quite heated in that courtroom.
You could see the hostility, you could feel it, you could know it, but you had to be there.
Also there, standing on the courthouse steps, was Congressman Charles Diggs of Michigan, only the third member of his race to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives.
I wanted to know firsthand just how the trial was going to be operated and all of the dimensions pertaining to it and their concept of justice, which I had heard about, but I'd never been directly exposed to.
Oh, what a wonderful feeling it was when I knew that a congressman had come all the way from Detroit, Michigan, to join me in that dark hour.
We don't need the help of the NAACP.
Tallahatchie County officials feared outside agitators, but the drive for justice was coming from native Mississippians, like NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers.
I do recall Medgar being very, very upset, to the point of tears.
Emmett's own great-uncle Moses Wright turned out to be the key prosecution witness.
This is Moses Wright. I am the uncle of Emmett Louis Till. Sunday morning, about 2:30, someone called at the door. And I said, "Who is it?" And he said, "This is Mr. Bryant. I want to talk with you and the boy. And when I opened the door, there was a man standing with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other hand. And he asked me, did I have two boys there from Chicago? I told him I have. And he said, I want the boy that done all that talk. And they marched him to the car, and they asked someone there, was this is the right boy? And the answer was, here. And they drove toward money.
He had a big church of people.
His Mississippi neighbors still recall the man who preached in a small church just off the county road.
When I was a little boy, he'd lay his hands on me and sit me on his knee. He was truly a father, a great man, full of the Spirit of God.
Moses Wright was full of courage, too. A Newsweek photo showed Moses Wright, a black man, standing in court pointing the finger of guilt at two white men.
It was a real climax. I suppose the first time a black has ever pointed to a white person in Mississippi, accusing him of a crime where he could be executed.
It was an act of courage, raw courage, because that man didn't know whether his life would be safe or not.
What about putting Brat and Milam on the stand? How do you feel about that at this time?
Of course, we're keeping our plans flexible. We, at this time, don't anticipate it will be necessary to put them on the stand.
Defense attorney John Whitten had no need to put his clients on the stand. In his final arguments to the 12 white men who almost 30 years ago sat in these seats, he said, every last Anglo-Saxon one of you men in this jury has the courage to set these men free.
You do what you have to do and stay within the limits that ethics require you to stay within.
It did not take the jury long to make up its mind. After hardly more than an hour's deliberation, it filed back into this courtroom. The foreman rose and read the verdict. Not guilty.
Did you expect this verdict? Well, I was hoping for it. Roy, how about you? I was hoping for the same.
Jury members said they would have reached a verdict even sooner if they hadn't stopped to drink pop. Ray Tribble sat among them.
I think the jury was right by what the determination it made.
They committed the murder and told me they did and told me how they did.
But writer William Bradford Huey then heard what the jurors had not. J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant told him that they had indeed murdered Emmett Till. Huey's article in Look magazine early in 1956 told the story. But Milam and Bryant, once acquitted by the jury, could not be tried again. And for the murder of Emmett Till, no one was ever punished.
Roy Bryant, Milam, they were in court every day. And they sat at the front and they chewed on cigars.
They were playing with their little boys and laughing with their wives, and you just felt like they felt very sure that they would not be convicted.
Papa, Mose Wright, said, hey, one thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna testify at the trial. Whether I live, I don't know, but I'm gonna talk.
Simeon, one of the cousins who was actually in the bed with Emmett when they took him,
he then, just like Reverend Mose, can be a witness to what happened.
Simeon went every day with Papa because he thought he would be called to testify. And they kept him back in the witness room, but you know, he could see the people. And he saw how that they had the black press and all that. They sitting over on the side at a little card table.
The legacy of slavery is everywhere in that courtroom. The courtroom is segregated, with blacks on one side, whites on the other.
Mose Wright was the bravest black man I've ever known in my life. To have testified as he did.
On August the 28th, Mose said someone came to his door knocking.
He testified that they got Emmett Till out of bed at about 2 to 2:30 a.m.
They brought him out of the house and asked someone, was that the boy?
Prosecutor asked, was that a man's voice or a lady's voice you heard in the car? Mose answers, it seemed like it was a lighter voice than a man's. We don't know if it was Carolyn Bryant in the truck. It's been assumed over time that it was Carolyn Bryant, but then there are others who have assumed that she stayed back at the store.
And when he was asked, could he identify the two men who had come to his house and taken Emmett Till away with them?
He stood up and almost stood on his tiptoes and pointed at Milam and said, there he is. And then said Mr. Bryant was with him.
It was taking a stand as if to say, you killed my nephew, but you're not gonna run me off.
That took guts.
I see some of the athletes, they were put up their fist and kneel during the Star Spangled Banner. It's because of, I think, what my father did.
His example is the example of those who are not going to be silent, those who know that there is a price to pay.
That day, my grandfather had come home from trial and he couldn't sleep. He said he was restless and he got up and went and slept in the cemetery.
When Mamie T. Mobley shows up in the courtroom, the white photographers and other reporters go crazy trying to get pictures of her. She is dignified, she's wearing black, she carries herself upright.
What do you intend to do here today?
To answer any questions that the attorneys might ask me to answer.
Do you have any evidence bearing on this case?
I do know that this is my son.
She was just amazingly composed, testifying at the courthouse and saying, yes, it was his body.
The defense, upon cross-examination, asked in a very aggressive line of questioning whether she had an insurance policy on Emmett Till. Had he ever been to a reform school? Had he ever had trouble with white people? And it was by my reading, a backhanded way of suggesting that he might have been a troublesome boy to begin with.
She knew that justice may not occur in that courtroom, but she had to do her part. And her part was to tell not just about her son truthfully, but also to face down Mississippi.
At 11 tonight, the family of Emmett Till wants authorities to make an arrest in his lynching that happened nearly 7 decades ago after a team discovered an unserved warrant in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse charging a white woman in his kidnapping. The warrant, dated August 29th of 1955, names Carolyn Bryant Donham as Mrs. Roy Bryant as the kidnapper. Emmett Till was abducted from a relative's home, killed and dumped into a river after Donham accused him of making improper advances to her in a store. A witness said the 14-year-old whistled at her. His accused killers were tried and acquitted, but admitted to the killing later in an interview. Donham is now in her 80s and most recently lived in North Carolina. The Till family is calling for her arrest. The district attorney's office that would oversee the case declined to comment on this story.
For many of you, the name Emmett Till may not sound familiar, but what happened to him in 1955 stunned the nation. Emmett Till was a young black boy who was murdered in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman, and his death was a spark that ignited the civil rights movement in America. 2 white men were put on trial for killing him, but in spite of strong evidence against them, they were acquitted in about an hour by an all-white jury. Let us tell you what happened to Emmett Till. He was 14 years old when he was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The 2 men who were acquitted of his murder were Roy Bryant and his half-brother, J.W. Milam. The failure to punish anyone for the crime made headlines across the country and around the world, exposing the racial hatred and unequal justice for blacks that was pervasive in the segregated South, where laws dictated where blacks could eat and drink and where they could sleep. But Emmett Till wasn't from the South. He was from Chicago and just visiting relatives in Mississippi in August of 1955 when his nightmare began. Emmett's 16-year-old cousin traveled to Mississippi with him. The family was reluctant to let Emmett take the trip, afraid his free-spirited nature could get him into trouble in the Deep South. That cousin who traveled with him is Wheeler Parker Jr., now 65 years old.
He was a center of attraction. He loved pranks, he loved fun, he loved jokes, you know. He just was there in the center of everything. He's kind of a natural-born leader.
Why would that be a problem?
In Mississippi, why would it be a problem? It would be a problem because the Mississippians, what he thought was just fun or a joke wasn't funny to them.
So before you went down, did anybody say, look, here are the do's and the don'ts about going to Mississippi. You do this, you don't do that?
Oh, yes, that's routine. You're always prepared to go to Mississippi to stay alive because, you know, once you got to Mississippi, you had no protection under the law. You couldn't call anyone for help once you were there if you got in trouble.
For Emmett Till, the trouble started here, at Bryant's Meat Market and Grocery Store in Money, Mississippi. Back then, most of the customers at this store were black workers from nearby cotton plantations. The store was owned by a white couple, Roy Bryant, and his 21-year-old wife, Carolyn, who was behind the counter the afternoon that Emmett Till and his cousins came in to buy some candy. As he was leaving the store, Emmett Till whistled at Carolyn Bryant, and she went to get a gun. Simeon Wright, Emmett Till's cousin who lived in Mississippi, was 12 years old on that day when they went to Bryant's grocery store. Today, at 62, he says the sound of Emmett whistling is as vivid to him now as it was 50 years ago.
When he whistled, we ran, we jumped in the car, and we got out of there.
Just because he whistled?
Oh, yes. It's like if you're a kid, you throw a rock and break a window, you don't hang around to see what's going to happen.
And you knew that in Mississippi, at that time, 1955, that was something you didn't do.
That was something you didn't do.
Emmett Till and his cousins raced home that day and hoped nothing would come of what Emmett had done. But 3 days later, Carolyn Bryant's husband Roy and his half-brother J.W. Milam went looking for Emmett Till in the middle of the night and found him and his cousins at the home of Reverend Mose Wright, Emmett's late great-uncle, who recounted what happened next.
Sunday morning, about 2:30, I heard a voice at the door, and I asked who was it, and it said, "This is Mr. Bryant. I want to talk with you and the boy." And when I opened the door, there was a man standing with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other.
Emmett Till and Simeon Wright, Mose Wright's son, were asleep together in one room, and Wheeler Parker was in another room, awakened by the sounds of angry voices.
Fear just gripped me because in my heart I said, I'm getting ready to die. And at 16, I wasn't ready to die. And I could just feel like the whole bed was shaking, and in these guys come with a pistol in one hand and a flashlight in the other. And for some reason, I closed my eyes and I opened them, and they just passed right on by me. Went to the next room.
I woke up and I looked. I saw two men standing over the bed with one had a gun, which was J.W. Milam. I saw Roy Bryant. They ordered me to lay back down and go back to sleep. And they ordered Emmett to get up and put his clothes on. And my mother was pleading and begging with him not to take him. My dad was pleading with him. And my mother then at that time offered to give them money to leave Emmett alone. And Roy Bryant kind of hesitated, but J.W. Milam, he didn't hesitate at all. He didn't even think about taking money. He came there to take Emmett, and that's what he proceeded to do.
Before taking Emmett Till out of the house, Simeon Wright says J.W. Milam threatened his father, Reverend Mose Wright.
Before they left my room, he turned and asked my daddy how old was he. My daddy told him that he was 64, and J.W. Milam said, if you tell anybody about this, you won't live to get 65.
Well, what did you think then?
This man wasn't afraid of the law. Here he marched into my home, take out my cousin, and wasn't afraid the law was going to bother him.
This must have been terrifying for you. I mean, you weren't 13 yet. You were 12 years old.
12 years old.
Lying in bed in the middle of the night, two white men come in, one with a gun, and tells your cousin to get up and get dressed?
Yes, yes.
I'd have been scared to death.
Not only afraid, but there was a sorrow, a sadness over the whole house. It looked like you could cut the grief in the house. Because after they left, no one said anything, hardly. All I could hear my dad say was,
On August 31st, 1955, 3 days after he'd been abducted, Emmett Till's mangled body was found by a boy fishing in the waters of the Tallahatchie River not far from Money. His body had been weighted down by a 75-pound fan from a cotton gin attached to his neck by barbed wire. He'd been badly tortured. An eye was detached, an ear cut off, and he appeared to have been shot in the head. His death was the birth of a powerful and lasting symbol of Southern racism in the 20th century. The local sheriff, H.C. Strider, a plantation owner and ardent segregationist, tried to have the body buried immediately in this small cemetery in Money, Mississippi, hoping no one in the outside world would ever find out what happened to Emmett Till. But Emmett's mother, Mamie, battled with Mississippi authorities and was able to have her son's body returned to Chicago so she could identify him before she buried him. Mamie Till was determined never to let anyone forget the brutal way in which her son was killed. She described the chilling story in one of the final interviews she gave before her death last year at age 81.
I looked at the bridge of his nose, and it looked like someone had taken a meat chopper and chopped it. And I looked at his teeth because I took so much pride in his teeth. His teeth were the prettiest things I'd ever seen in my life, I thought. And I only saw two. Well, where are the rest of them? They'd just been knocked out. And I was looking at his ears, and that's when I discovered a hole about here, and I could see daylight on the other side. I said, now, was it necessary to shoot him?
Some 50,000 people, nearly all of them black, turned out for Emmett Till's funeral in an enormous public display of grief and solidarity. Mamie Till ordered the funeral director to place her son in an open casket and permitted this shocking photograph of Emmett's corpse, which was published in Jet magazine and seen across the country.
Advance toward the group.
It ignited protests, civil disobedience, and backlash that would consume the South through the 60s.
I said, I want the world to see this. Because when people saw what had happened to this little 14-year-old boy, they knew then that not only were men, black men, in danger, but black children as well.
The same day that Emmett Till was buried, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were indicted on charges of kidnapping and murder. Their trial was held in the small Mississippi town of Sumner, billed as a good place to raise a boy. The star witness was Emmett Till's late great-uncle, Mose Wright, who bravely stood up in the courtroom and pointed his finger at Milam and Bryant as the ones who had come to his home and abducted Emmett Till at gunpoint. Another key witness was an 18-year-old sharecropper named Willie Reed, who said that on the morning after Emmett Till was abducted, he saw Emmett on a truck with 6 people: Roy Bryant, J.W. Milam, 2 other white men, and 2 black men who worked for Milam. Soon after, Reed said he saw the same truck parked in front of a barn managed at the time by Milam's brother, and heard the screams of a young boy he presumed was Emmett Till. Today, at age 67, Reed says he still cannot get those sounds out of his mind.
I heard the screaming, beating, streaming, and beating. And I said to myself, I said, man, them beating somebody in that barn. I can hear it beating. The licks, I can hear the licks.
You could hear the licks?
Yes, you could. You could.
According to Willie Reed and another witness, 4 white men came out of the barn, including Milam, who walked right up to Reed carrying a .45 caliber pistol.
Milam was coming out of the barn, so he actually said, listen, did you all hear anything? And I said, no, I haven't heard anything.
Why would you say that? I mean, you had heard something. You had heard screaming, you had heard somebody being beaten?
Yeah, I saw somebody being beaten. But then you see Milam come on with like I said, with the khaki pants on and a green shirt and 45 on his side. Then he asked you, man, what you gonna say?
You didn't hear anything?
I didn't hear anything.
You knew that's what he wanted to hear?
Right.
When they found the body, did you put 2 and 2 together and think that what you had heard going on in that barn, that was Emmett Till?
I'm sure. I was sure then.
Fearing for his life after testifying against Milam and Bryant, Willie Reed was smuggled out of Mississippi. He went to Chicago, where he suffered a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. You're a good man. You had a lot of courage for an 18-year-old. I think there are a lot of people who would have walked away from it. Wouldn't have said a word.
No, I couldn't walk away from that like that. Because Emmett was 14, probably never been to Mississippi in his life. And he come to visit his grandfather. And they killed him. I mean, that's not right. I saw, when they in the picture, they saw his body, what it was like. Then I knew that I couldn't say no.
As the trial drew to a close, attorneys for J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant warned the all-white jury that if they voted to convict, quote, your forefathers will turn over in their graves. It took the jury just an hour and 7 minutes to return a verdict of not guilty. One juror said it wouldn't have taken that long, but they stopped to take a soda pop break to make it look good. Milam and Bryant were congratulated by their many supporters and kissed their wives in celebration.
How do you folks feel now that it's all over? Roy, how about you?
I'm just glad it's over with.
Frankly, I think that this is a result primarily of the interference in Mississippi and Mississippi affairs by outside interests, and a result of the NAACP and their activities in trying to make something big out of just an ordinary criminal affair in Mississippi. After the trial some 5 or 6 weeks ago now, we are still receiving in the Daily Mail threatening letters from all over the United States saying that justice was not done when no fair-minded jury in New York, Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, or anywhere else would have convicted these 2 men on this scanty evidence which was produced.
Well, the whole trial was just a farce, but the verdict was the one that I had expected to be given.
Do you feel that all the witnesses were brought into the case?
No. 2 of the witnesses were being held in protective custody in Sheriff Strider's jail in Charleston.
My first reaction when I saw that they come in and said not guilty was unbelief, anger, revenge. And one of the reasons that, I went back home was we had 2 guns. I just had the idea, hey, we could fight it out. My only problem was there was no gun for me. But I wanted revenge. I carried a chip on my shoulder for many years.
It was obvious that they had no trouble deciding that they were to let these men go free. And I later heard that, in fact, the reason it even took an hour, or whatever hour so it took, was that they simply were trying to be correct about the way they delivered their answer. But the answer was a foregone conclusion.
And then when they interviewed the foreman of the jury, he said it wouldn't have taken us that long, but they told us to make it look good. So we had some soda pop and beer and waited a little while, and then we came back with our verdict.
You never expect anything but for them to be acquitted, because that's Mississippi during that time.
When they acquitted Milam and Brat, it crushed my dad. He just couldn't take it anymore. He came home that day and said, "Boys, we got to leave. Can't stay here." Basically, we had no law back in '55 in relation to black and white killing each other.
Mr. Wright, the trial has been over for a week now. How do you feel about it after thinking it over?
I don't have any issue.
Were you surprised, or did you expect the verdict of acquittal?
I was thinking doing just what I could win.
You weren't surprised with the verdict?
It didn't surprise me.
When did you come to Chicago?
Monday night.
Why did you leave Mississippi, Mr. Wright?
Well, after Friday night, those men came to my house, but I just wasn't satisfied no more there. I just got willing and ready to leave, and I left this as quick as I could.
Men came to your house?
Friday night, 2.
What did they say?
Well, I've gone to bed, and I got restless through the night, and I got up and got in my car and went out to the church and stayed all night in the car. And a friend of mine told me that he was passing going home, said the car drove up in my yard and 2 white men was in it. And they got out with flashlights, just flashing all around the house, looking around the house. Of course, I didn't know anything about it, but I was just got restless through the night. And the next morning, I got up and went up to the house and just disposed of the crop a little I had there, and I just got in ready to leave right now. And I just
you go back for the kidnap trial.
So I'll go back to that. I promised the sheriff I'll do that, and so if I leave, I'm going back. But after being I'm through with Mississippi forever and ever.
I know that Milam and Bryant had help when they murdered Emmett Till. Number one, they recruited a black boy, Leroy Too Tight Collins. He was seen on the truck restraining Emmett. That was the purpose of his being there. And I heard later that he told the 2 men that he was having difficulty restraining Emmett, and they stopped and picked up another guy.
At the time of Emmett Till's death, I was 13 years old. And me and my friends was walking down the streets, and we walked up and to the truck that Too Tight and Jim Lee was washing out. And I asked him what was the blood from, and he told me that it was from a deer they killed that night. But later on I found out that it was not a deer, it was Emmett Till's blood.
J.W. Milam told my father they went, picked Emmett Till up, and they was going to kind of like rough him up or beat him up a little bit and let him go. That was his story. But Roy and Kimball really, really beat him bad, and things just really got out of hand. That was his story, but we know better. And beat him up so bad till he asked Leroy Too Tight Collins and gave him the gun and told him to shoot him and get him out of his misery.
My name is Henry Long, and I was supposed to have been involved with Emmett Till murder, but I wasn't. And I still can't figure out why they would have me involved in that. And I knows nothing about it, no more what was told. This woman named Mary, she came up, she said, y'all heard about what happened last night? I said, no. And they said, yeah. I said, J.W. and them went over to Mondays and killed a boy and put him in the river. It wasn't a river, Black Bow. So I said, no, we ain't heard nothing about that. And so she said, said Too Tight said, that shoe laying down, I said, that's a shoe that boy had on. So they went to this boy's grandparents and asked about him. Said, Dad, his granddad said, he's in there asleep. Said, what you want with him? Said, well, wake him up. We're going to get him out of there and take him and put him in the river down there. So he said, no. Said, no, white folks don't do that. Now, that's what they say, he said now. Said, don't do that. So I'll, if you let him stay here in the morning, I'll put him on a bus and send him back to Chicago. So no. They said, no, we want him out of here now. And said, I don't want to lie, I think they said that one of them hit the old man, the boy's granddaddy. Said, I reckon he didn't want him to.
4 months after the trial, knowing that double jeopardy protected them from being tried again, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam admitted to a reporter from Look magazine that they had in fact tortured and murdered Emmett Till. They were paid $4,000 for their story. In it, Milam said, I just made up my mind. Chicago boy, I said, I'm tired of 'em sending your kind down here to stir up trouble. Damn you, I'm going to make an example of you. Emmett Till's family has had to live with that for nearly 50 years, that his killers confessed and nothing ever happened to them.
An unserved warrant found in the basement of a Mississippi courthouse last week has led to calls for a new arrest in the 1955 kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. The 14-year-old from Chicago was visiting family down south when he allegedly whistled at a white female store clerk. The clerk's husband and another man were acquitted by an all-white jury, but later confessed in an interview. The newly discovered arrest warrant accuses the female store clerk of taking part in Till's abduction. Till's relatives want the woman, who is now in her 80s, prosecuted.
Hey guys, I'm at the Latrone Cemetery in Ruralville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, and I am after the grave of Roy Bryant Sr., which is just right up here in front of me. Roy Sr., not a nice guy. He is, along with his half-brother, J.W., murdered 14-year-old Emmett Till on August 28th, 1955 in Money, Mississippi. Emmett Till's, of course, death kind of sparked the civil rights movement. Roy's wife, they had a Bryant the Bryant grocery store, and Emmett Till was with his cousins. He's from Chicago. Came down here and went into the store to get a piece of candy, and Roy's wife at the time, not Vera Jo, but Roy's wife at the time alleged that young Emmett Till whistled at her or was flirting with her. Told Roy, and Roy and his half-brother J.W., they decided to go and I'm sure it started off to teach Emmett Till a lesson, but in the end they murdered him, mutilated him, tossed him off a bridge, and poor Emmett Till, he was, it was a brutal torture. Roy Sr. and J.W. were arrested, and they were tried in an all-white male jury. And surprise, surprise, they were found not guilty. A year later, in 1956, Roy and J.W. sold their story to Look magazine, where they admitted to killing young Emmett Till. And double jeopardy laws at the time did not allow for a retrial or conviction. So Roy and J.W. got away with the murder of a young black man here in Mississippi. Emmett Till was denied a nice long life. Roy was not, unfortunately. Passed away September 1st, 1994. His second wife, Vera Jo, passed away a little more recently in May 2nd, 2012. He is buried here beside his sister, Doris. So, anyways, this guy, you know, he didn't deserve what he got, a nice long life for what he did to Emmett Till's and his brother JW. I understand he is somebody's father. Hopefully his kids did a lot better than he did in their life and have done things to right his wrongs, because clearly they have family out here supporting, bringing out the flowers and whatnot. But he was not a nice guy. Like I said, he's a murderer, he's a racist, and here he lies in this very nice little cemetery in Sunflower County, Minnesota, or I'm sorry, Mississippi. All right, guys, enough of him.
I am Lamont at Large, and today I am here to show you the graves of the two men who killed Emmett Till, got away with it, and later admitted it in a newspaper article about how they tortured and killed him. We are looking for Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.D. Milam, and currently right now we are at the Lurton Cemetery here in Ruleville, Mississippi. So we're going to visit the grave first of Roy Bryant, and then we're going to drive about 45 miles to the northwest to Greenville, where J.W. is buried. And here he is, the murderer, Roy Bryant, January 24th, 1931 to September 1st, 1994. He's buried next to his second wife, Era Jo. Of course, his first wife being Carolyn Bryant, the woman that accused Emmett Till of verbally and physically assaulting her, which was all a lie. Even though her testimony was not admissible in the court of law, she still lied to anybody who would listen, saying a 14-year-old little kid grabbed her around the waist and boasted about his exploits with white women from Illinois. Just an ultimately disgusting and stupid lie. I'm not sure what would possess a grown man to seek out revenge over a innocent prank, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. It's been lost throughout the years on whether it was an actual whistle or it was a cat call, a wolf whistle, whatever. The point being, an innocent kid was killed by the hands of this man's hands and his brother, JW. After the court case, when he was found innocent, people stopped going to that store and it quickly went out of business. And many of the black folks in the area of money didn't want to work for any plantation owners right there. A lot of them moved down out of town into the surrounding areas, and this murder is one of the reasons why people just left that town, and it's just a very desolate town. And the plantation owners of that area had to overpay white workers quite a lot in those days too, to pick the soybeans and the cotton, the jobs that normally black folks did. Well, you know, hey, payable on death. You tortured that kid for nothing at all. What goes around comes around. Best believe. Best believe. Okay, so we're going to visit the grave of JW. He is about 35, 40 miles from here, so we're going to go hit the road and I'll show you his grave as well. And here we are, 42 miles away in Greenville, Mississippi. We are at the Green Lawn Cemetery. I'm standing in the shade. It is about 97 degrees, very humid and hot, muggy over here. And according to the information available on the internet, his grave should be right somewhere within the next 100 feet. We're approaching the grave of J.W. Milam. He was the older half-brother of Roy Bryant. And let's not forget, these two men admitted to murdering Emmett Till. Not sure which one was the trigger man who actually pulled it, but it doesn't really matter. They're both murderers, and anybody involved with them, as far as I'm concerned. Here is the flowerless grave of John W. Milam, February 18th, 1919 to December 31st, 1980. Both of those guys didn't live very long. They both died in their early 60s. As you can see, the grass around him is dead. Not even the grass likes you. It's funny how it's green everywhere else, except your grave. According to the published article in Look magazine, which both of the brothers were paid a little over $3,000 to readily admit that they killed him, they said that their intentions were to just scare him, but that he was talking back to them during the beating. This guy even looks evil. So, you're all by yourself. You don't got really many neighbors here. So, I'm going to leave you be. And, hey, wherever you're at right now, whatever it is, if you're conscious, not conscious, I don't know. But it's one thing if he went to prison and did time for what he did and got out and he served his time. But this guy, he didn't serve his time. He didn't pay for what he did. Neither him nor Roy.